Marie Antoinette never needed to order massacres to become one of the most hated queens in history. What made her terrifying to ordinary people was how completely detached she seemed while France collapsed around her. In the late 1780s, harvests failed, bread prices exploded, and starving families wandered Paris searching for scraps to survive. Mothers watched children die while riots erupted outside bakeries. Yet inside the Palace of Versailles, Marie Antoinette spent fortunes on silk gowns, diamond jewelry, gambling tables, masked balls, and her private fantasy estate, the Petit Trianon, where she played shepherdess while peasants starved across the kingdom. Servants described rooms glowing with chandeliers while crowds outside screamed for bread. Pamphlets spread through Paris portraying her as a foreign parasite draining France dry for pleasure. Then came the rumor that defined her forever. When told peasants had no bread, she supposedly replied, "Let them eat cake." By 1793, crowds gathered cheering as the guillotine blade dropped on the queen they blamed for their misery. Cleopatra VII ruled like every person around her was either a weapon or an obstacle. When her father died in 51 BC, Cleopatra was forced to share the Egyptian throne with her younger brother Ptolemy XIII, a boy she was also expected to marry. But power in Egypt was never meant to be shared. Civil war exploded between the siblings, and Cleopatra was driven from Alexandria by advisors loyal to her brother. Instead of surrendering, she gambled everything on one man, Julius Caesar. According to ancient accounts, she had herself secretly smuggled into Caesar's quarters wrapped inside bedding or a carpet. By morning, Caesar was no longer Egypt's neutral mediator, he was Cleopatra's ally. War followed. Ptolemy XIII fled after Caesar's forces crushed his army and reportedly drowned in the Nile while trying to escape. Cleopatra returned to the throne. Then came her sister, Arsinoe IV, who had once led a rebellion against her. Cleopatra never forgot it. Years later, after securing the support of Mark Antony, she demanded Arsinoe be dragged from the sacred temple of Artemis in Ephesus and executed on the temple steps, violating one of the holiest sanctuaries in the ancient world. As Octavian's armies closed in on Alexandria in 30 BC, Cleopatra VII refused to be dragged through Rome in chains as a conquered trophy. She locked herself inside her mausoleum and died by suicide, most famously said to be from the bite of a venomous asp, though historians still debate the exact method. Irene of Athens became one of history's most feared queens because she destroyed the one person she was supposed to protect, her own son. After Emperor Leo IV died in 780 AD, Irene ruled the Byzantine Empire as regent for her young son Constantine VI. At first, she presented herself as a loyal mother guiding a child emperor through a dangerous court full of conspiracies. But as Constantine grew older, he wanted real power, and Irene refused to let go. Their relationship turned into open political warfare. In 797 AD, her soldiers captured Constantine inside the imperial palace and dragged him into the Porphyra, the same purple chamber where Irene had once given birth to him. There, on his mother's orders, executioners pinned the emperor down and drove metal instruments into his eyes, blinding him so brutally that many chroniclers believed he died from the wounds shortly afterward. The screams reportedly echoed through the palace, while Irene calmly took the throne for herself as sole ruler of the Byzantine Empire. After years of ruling alone, Irene of Athens was overthrown in 802 AD by her own officials, who exiled her from the imperial palace she had killed to control. The woman who once ruled the Byzantine Empire ended her life in poverty on the island of Lesbos, reportedly surviving by spinning wool. Fredegund rose from servant to queen through manipulation, seduction, and murder. In the 6th century, King Chilperic I became obsessed with her even though he was already married to Queen Galswintha. Galswintha quickly realized Fredegund still controlled the king behind the scenes and demanded Chilperic send his mistress away. Instead, Galswintha was found strangled in her bed. Chroniclers of the time openly blamed Fredegund for orchestrating the murder so she could take the throne herself. But that killing only began decades of bloodshed. Galswintha's sister, Queen Brunhilde, swore revenge, and the two queens turned Frankish Europe into a battlefield of assassinations and political terror. Kings, princes, nobles, and bishops were hunted down as the rivalry consumed entire kingdoms. Fredegund allegedly ordered the assassination of King Sigebert I while he celebrated victory in battle. Assassins armed with poisoned daggers slipped through the crowd and stabbed him to death in front of his army. Even Fredegund's own daughter was not safe. After the girl insulted her mother and claimed she deserved the throne instead, Fredegund lured her into a treasure room, slammed a heavy chest lid onto her neck, and nearly crushed her to death before servants intervened. Fredegund spent her final years still surrounded by plots, assassinations, and enemies created by decades of bloodshed across the Frankish kingdoms. She died peacefully in 597 AD in Paris. Agrippina the Younger survived the blood-soaked insanity of the Roman imperial family by becoming more dangerous than the men around her. She was the sister of Emperor Caligula, the wife of Emperor Claudius, and the mother of Nero, and she used every relationship as a weapon. In 49 AD, Agrippina married her own uncle, Emperor Claudius, then immediately began removing anyone standing between her son Nero and the Roman throne. Rival nobles disappeared into exile. Others were executed after accusations of treason magically surfaced. Ancient historians claimed Agrippina poisoned Claudius himself using a plate of toxic mushrooms when she feared he might replace Nero as heir with his biological son Britannicus. Claudius died agonizingly after the meal, and Nero became emperor at just 16 years old. But Agrippina never intended to fade quietly into the background. She sat beside Nero during meetings, issued commands in his name, and acted like Rome belonged to her. Eventually, Nero realized his own mother had become too powerful to control. In 59 AD, he sent assassins to kill her. According to the Roman historian Tacitus, when the killers entered her chamber with drawn blades, Agrippina exposed her stomach and shouted, "Strike my womb," the womb that had given birth to Nero himself. Olga of Kiev transformed herself into a nightmare after the Drevlians murdered her husband, Prince Igor, in 945 AD. According to chronicles, the tribe tied Igor to two bent trees and tore his body apart when the trunk snapped back upright. Days later, the Drevlians sent 20 ambassadors to Kiev, expecting Olga to accept marriage with their prince and peacefully surrender power. Olga welcomed them warmly and ordered her servants to carry the men in their boat to the royal court as a sign of honor. The servants carried the boat directly over a giant trench secretly dug outside the palace walls. The ambassadors were thrown into the pit still inside the boat, while dirt buried them alive. Olga reportedly leaned over the edge, asking, "Is this honor to your taste?" Then she invited a second Drevlian delegation to bathe before negotiations. Once they entered the bathhouse, her soldiers locked the doors and burned the building, with everyone trapped inside screaming. But she still wasn't finished. At a funeral feast held for Igor, Olga waited until thousands of drunken Drevlians collapsed onto the grass before her warriors slaughtered them. Finally, after besieging the Drevlian capital for months, she demanded birds from every household as tribute. Her soldiers tied burning sulfur cloths to the birds' feet and released them. The birds flew back to their nests beneath the city's wooden roofs, setting the entire city ablaze at once. Isabella I of Castile helped build one of the most feared systems of religious terror in European history. In 1478, she and King Ferdinand received permission from the Pope to establish the Spanish Inquisition, a machine designed to hunt down anyone suspected of secretly rejecting Catholicism. Under Grand Inquisitor Tomás de Torquemada, prisons filled with Jews, Muslims, and converted Christians accused of practicing their old faiths in secret. Suspects were stretched on racks until joints tore apart, suspended from ceilings with weights chained to their limbs, or tortured until confessions were forced from them. Public executions became massive spectacles. Prisoners wearing painted robes marked with flames and demons were marched into crowded plazas before being burned alive during ceremonies known as autos da fe. Then came 1492. Isabella signed the Alhambra Decree ordering every Jewish person in Spain to either convert to Christianity or leave the kingdom forever. Families were given only months to abandon homes, businesses, and centuries of history. Thousands fled across Europe and North Africa, while others stayed behind, living in constant fear of accusation, imprisonment, or execution. Catherine de' Medici ruled France from the shadows during one of the bloodiest religious conflicts in European history. By the 1570s, Catholics and Protestant Huguenots were on the edge of civil war, and Catherine feared the growing influence of Protestant leaders over her son, King Charles IX. In August 1572, thousands of Huguenot nobles flooded Paris for the royal wedding meant to unite both sides. Instead, it became a trap. Days after the ceremony, Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, the most powerful Protestant leader in France, was shot by assassins. He survived the attack, but Catherine allegedly convinced the king that Protestant retaliation would destroy the monarchy unless their leaders were eliminated first. On the night of August 23rd, church bells rang across Paris. Royal soldiers and Catholic mobs stormed homes hunting Protestants by name. Coligny was stabbed repeatedly inside his room, thrown from a window, then mutilated by the crowd below. The violence exploded beyond control. Men, women, and children were dragged into streets and butchered while bodies clogged the Seine River. Over the following weeks, massacres spread across France, leaving tens of thousands dead. Whether Catherine planned every detail or unleashed forces she could no longer control, her name became permanently tied to the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, one of the most infamous bloodbaths in European history. She died in 1589, surrounded by a kingdom shattered by fear and religious slaughter. Mary I of England earned the name Bloody Mary by turning England into a landscape of public executions and burning flesh. After taking the throne in 1553, she was determined to destroy Protestantism and restore Catholic rule at any cost. Her first major target was Lady Jane Grey, the teenage girl briefly placed on the throne before Mary seized power. Jane was imprisoned in the Tower of London and executed by beheading in 1554. Her death meant to erase a Protestant symbol forever. Then the real terror began. Mary revived old heresy laws allowing religious dissenters to be burned alive. Bishops, priests, craftsmen, women, even elderly civilians were chained to wooden stakes in crowded marketplaces while spectators watched the fires rise around them. Some victims screamed prayers as flames consumed their legs first before climbing toward their faces. Others suffocated slowly as smoke filled their lungs. One of the most infamous executions was Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, forced to watch fellow Protestants burn before he himself was dragged to the stake in Oxford. Witnesses described the smell of burning human flesh hanging over English towns for hours after executions. Nearly 300 Protestants were burned during her short reign. She died in 1558 at just 42 years old, sick, isolated, and deeply unpopular across much of her kingdom. Wu Zetian clawed her way from low-ranking concubine to the most powerful ruler in China through a trail of fear, executions, and political destruction. After entering Emperor Gaozong's court, Wu quickly understood that survival inside the imperial palace depended on eliminating rivals before they eliminated you. According to later Tang records, after giving birth to a baby daughter in 654 AD, Wu allegedly smothered the infant herself, then accused Empress Wang of murder. Gaozong believed her. Empress Wang and consort Xiao were arrested, stripped of power, and imprisoned, but Wu was not satisfied with exile. Ancient chronicles claim she ordered both women's hands and feet cut off before their mutilated bodies were thrown into giant wine jars to die slowly in darkness. Once crowned empress, Wu created a network of secret police and informants who hunted critics across the empire, and some historians believe even members of her own family were poisoned or forced to commit suicide. Yet the terrifying part of Wu Zetian was that she was also highly competent. While rivals died around her, she strengthened the government, expanded the empire, and ruled China so effectively that many citizens prospered under the same woman her enemies described as a monster. She died in 705 AD after illness forced her from the throne, ending the only reign in Chinese history where a woman ruled as emperor in her own name. Elizabeth Bathory turned her castle into a chamber of torture so horrifying that centuries later she is still remembered as the Blood Countess. In the late 1500s, young servant girls were sent to her castle, expecting work in the household of one of Hungary's most powerful noblewomen. Many were never seen again. Witness testimonies later described girls beaten until their skin split open, needles driven beneath fingernails, and victims burned with red-hot irons while Elizabeth watched. During winter, some girls were dragged outside naked, doused with freezing water, and left to freeze solid in the snow. Others were starved for days inside locked rooms darkened by the smell of blood and decay. Rumors spread that Elizabeth believed bathing in the blood of virgins would preserve her youth forever. Whether true or not, investigators who raided her castle in 1610 reportedly discovered mutilated bodies, dying prisoners, and hidden corpses scattered across the estate. Servants testified that the killings had continued for years and that hundreds of girls had vanished into the castle. One witness claimed Elizabeth kept records listing over 600 victims. Too powerful to publicly execute, the Hungarian nobility sealed her inside her own castle instead. A tiny opening in the wall allowed food to pass through while she remained trapped alone in darkness for 4 years until her death in 1614. Ranavalona I ruled Madagascar through terror so extreme that some estimates claim half the island's population vanished during her reign. After seizing the throne in 1828, she immediately ordered rivals from the royal family hunted down and executed. Some were speared to death, while royal women were locked inside prisons and slowly starved because spilling noble blood was forbidden. Then came the loyalty trials. Suspected traitors were forced to swallow poison mixed with pieces of chicken skin. If they vomited all 3 pieces, they were declared innocent. If even one remained inside the stomach, they were executed on the spot. Ranavalona also outlawed Christianity and unleashed brutal punishments against converts. Christians were burned alive, boiled in oil, thrown from cliffs, or suspended over ravines until ropes snapped beneath them. Entire villages were emptied through forced labor projects where thousands died building roads, palaces, and military fortifications without food or pay. In 1845, the Queen launched a royal buffalo hunt involving nearly 50,000 people marching through disease-filled jungle. Starvation, malaria, exhaustion, and exposure killed around 10,000 people during the expedition. And not a single buffalo was captured. By the time Ranavalona died peacefully in her bed in 1861, Madagascar had become a kingdom feared as much by its own people as by foreign powers.